The story of the alligator hunter in the Louisiana swamps. In the early 20th century, in a remote part of Louisiana where winding rivers met dense forests, my grandfather, whom I always called Grandpa, lived through difficult times. Alongside his family and relatives, he struggled every day in a small town called Rosedale, near the Ashafalaya River. Life there was always full of challenges, and things only got worse when the Great Depression hit. Before the economic collapse, the people in this region mostly relied on fishing, hunting, and logging. However, when the economy crumbled, money became scarce, and many of the old jobs were no longer enough to support a family. Work in seafood processing plants and logging crews declined drastically, forcing people to search for new ways to make a living. But Grandpa knew there was one job that few dared to take on. Yet it could bring in a large amount of money: hunting alligators. The vast swamps surrounding Rosedale were home to massive alligators, and hunting them required not just skill, but also immense bravery. It was a highly dangerous job, and not everyone was capable of doing it. The swamp where Grandpa lived was a thick forest filled with towering cypress trees and narrow, dark waterways. The alligators in this area were not ordinary. Some could grow as long as 12 meters when fully grown. Hunters had to deeply understand the layout of the swamp where the gators lived, where bears roamed, and which areas were the most dangerous and best avoided. People in town, like Grandpa, didn't have many options. Aside from gator hunting, they also had to deal with harsh natural conditions, food shortages, and economic hardship. But when no other work was enough to keep families fed, hunting gators became a surprisingly effective way to earn a living. Grandpa told us that hunting alligators back then was far from a simple job. To succeed, a hunter had to understand gator behavior where they lived, where they searched for food, and especially where they liked to bask in the sun. A hunting group would leave home at dawn and work until late into the night. If they were lucky, they could bring in 2 to 3 gators in one day, enough to provide for the family for an entire week. Despite the danger, people like my grandpa saw it as an opportunity to support their loved ones. A large gator could fetch a high price, not just for its hide, but also for its meat. Even smaller gators could bring in profit, especially when preserved for long-term food supplies. One day, Grandpa and his hunting group heard a strange story from a hunter named John Guidry. He said that during one hunting trip, his team spotted a large white alligator. This creature had skin as white as snow and measured at least 6 meters in length. However, when John's team tried to catch it, the gator disappeared into the deep black waters. None of them could believe their own eyes. The story of the white alligator caught Grandpa and his friends' attention. They decided to plan a trip to search for this legendary creature, but they had no idea that this journey would lead them into a dangerous adventure, one that could change their lives forever. When my grandfather and his group of fellow hunters ventured into the swamp, they knew they weren't only facing danger from the alligators, they had to be mentally prepared for anything that might happen. The swamp wasn't just home to gators, but also to many other creatures, like venomous snakes and wild animals, all of which could pose a deadly threat to anyone without experience. They had to use all their skills to navigate through muddy terrain and narrow rivers where the water was as black as ink. Still, what my grandfather remembered most vividly was the terrifying feeling of being surrounded by too many alligators, especially at night, when the dim glow of oil lamps flickered in the darkness. Everything felt mystical and dangerously uncertain. One of the greatest threats came when they had to cross rivers, where gators could attack anyone who wasn't careful. My grandfather recounted that once, while their group was moving by boat, a massive alligator suddenly lunged out from the shadows and smashed their vessel. One of his friends was nearly dragged underwater. Fortunately, they managed to escape just in time and reached the shore safely. The story of the white alligator only fueled their determination. John Guidry and his team had seen the giant white gator, but failed to capture it, and my grandfather's group refused to give up. They decided to venture deeper into the area that Guidry had described, believing that with some luck, they might find the legendary creature. But what my grandfather didn't expect was that during their search, they would come face to face with another massive alligator. It might not have been the white gator they were looking for, but its sheer size and strength made it a fierce opponent. My grandfather said they fought the beast for hours, and by the time they finally brought it down, they were all completely exhausted. However, as they loaded the gator onto the boat and began their journey back, they discovered that the land they had passed through had grown more dangerous than ever. Strange signs in the forest and bloodstains in the water suggested they weren't alone in that area. As night fell, my grandfather and the group found a patch of dry ground to set up camp. But the deeper they moved into that part of the swamp, the more he felt something was wrong. The red reflection of alligator eyes in the glow of the oil lamps made everything feel eerie and ominous. It was as if some unseen force was watching their every move. Tension filled the air, and just as they were preparing to sleep, a loud crash came from outside the camp. A giant alligator suddenly burst into their sight, destroying everything in its path. The group had no choice but to flee into the darkness, continuing their journey in fear. That night, no one could sleep. They sat in silence, taking turns keeping watch, trying to stay calm as strange noises and repeated attacks made them feel like they were the ones being hunted. After such a terrifying night, my grandfather and his group decided to turn back. They knew that if they continued searching for the white gator, they could be facing even greater dangers. Though there was some regret in not finding the legendary creature, they understood that survival was more important than anything else. The next day, they returned to the riverbank and began preparing to leave the swamp. Their injuries and exhaustion made it impossible to continue, but in my grandfather's mind, one question still lingered. Would they ever truly be safe if they returned here again? Eventually, they left the swamp, carrying with them memories of haunting encounters with alligators. That journey changed my grandfather's perspective on what they had done, and from that point on, he decided to give up alligator hunting. After returning to normal life, he found a different job, but the stories of the hunt were always retold whenever the family gathered together, especially the tale of the legendary white alligator. After deciding to return, my grandfather and the group of hunters prepared themselves for a new trip into the deepest parts of the swamp. It was by no means an easy journey, as they had to face dangers from all sides: overhanging branches, muddy pits, and alligators lurking nearby. Every step into this area was a challenge. The hunting group prepared thoroughly, bringing along hunting tools, boats, and oil lamps to light their way at night. However, the deeper they ventured into the swamp, the more suffocating and threatening the atmosphere became. Strange sounds from the trees and wild animals added to the sense that something wasn't right. "We have to be extremely careful," my grandfather warned everyone. "We don't know when the white alligator might appear, but if we let our guard down, even a small mistake could cost someone their life." While the group was focused on searching for the white alligator, they began to notice signs of other gators. These were large, powerful creatures, not their main target, but ones that made the hunt more dangerous than ever. These gators were not easy to chase and could attack if they felt threatened. Once, while the group was crossing a narrow river, an alligator suddenly lunged from below, attacking their boat. Everyone barely had time to jump out and swim to shore, but the gator continued to pursue them. After a fierce battle, they had to abandon their boat and precious equipment to escape with their lives. Throughout the journey, the group encountered a horrifying situation. One of them, a hunter named Jack, went missing while out looking for bait. They searched for hours, but couldn't find him. Panic and fear began to set in. "We can't leave him behind," my grandfather said, voice filled with concern. "Let's split up and search again." But despite searching through day and night, Jack was nowhere to be found. Only when the light from their oil lamps shone over a patch of dark water did they discover part of Jack's body floating on the surface. The sight was too gruesome to describe. From the bite marks, they knew he had been attacked by an alligator. The group decided to stop searching for the white alligator and return. But they had lost a friend, and this trip forced them to reconsider the risks they were taking. Some time later, my grandfather and his friends returned to the swamp once more. Although the loss of Jack still weighed heavily on them, they felt a sense of responsibility to finish what they had started. What pushed them forward was the story of the white alligator, legendary beast that many believed could bring a life of abundance to anyone brave enough to face it. With determination, they continued their journey, but this time, they entered an entirely new area that no one had dared to explore before. The group of hunters trudged quietly through dense shadows of the trees, the only sounds being water lapping against the banks and the crunching of footsteps on the underbrush. After a week of hardship, they reached an area where the white alligator might have lived. Suddenly, the light from their oil lamp shone on a pale white figure in the pitch-black water. It was the white alligator they had heard so many stories about. The sight was terrifying. This giant alligator could be up to 7 meters long, and its skin was as white as snow, reflecting the lamp's glow like a ghostly apparition. However, just as they prepared to attack, the alligator quickly disappeared into the darkness of the forest, leaving the group of hunters frozen in place, unable to act. After the unsuccessful encounter with the white alligator, the group decided to head back, even though they couldn't capture the legendary creature. What they had experienced was enough to make them realize that danger didn't always lead to reward. My grandfather said that after this trip, he decided to quit alligator hunting and never return to the swamp again. The stories of that hunt were always told to his children and grandchildren, especially the tale of the white alligator, which he and his group still believed might exist somewhere in the depths of the swamp. After the group of hunters decided to turn back, life returned to a false sense of peace in the town of Rosedale. However, my grandfather couldn't forget what had happened on that trip. The feeling of helplessness when they had to leave behind the massive alligators they had chased for so many days never left him, especially the legendary white alligator, which they had thought was only a rumor. But according to my grandfather, deep down inside, he knew that the creature was real. One humid summer evening, with the damp atmosphere of the swamp still lingering in his memory, he decided that he would return one more time, not to hunt, but to prove that what they had encountered in the forest was real. His former hunting companions were no longer strong enough to go with him, but he remained determined and began to make plans. This time, he wouldn't go alone. The old group of hunters was gone, but my grandfather found a new companion, Gaston Dupree, known as one of the best alligator hunters in the region. Gaston was quiet but full of experience and had a deep understanding of the swamp. Though many townsfolk warned him not to go back, he still decided to go through with the journey, despite the danger. This time, it wasn't just about searching for the white alligator, but also to prove that he could overcome the fear and the monsters he had once faced in the swamp. After several days deep in the swamp, my grandfather and Gaston arrived at a place they believed was the white alligator's habitat. The area was completely silent, no birds, no insects, only the sound of their footsteps and the gentle splashes of water beneath the boat. But as they drew closer, an unusual feeling rose within them. Something in the air made them sense a mysterious presence nearby. Suddenly, in the dim glow of the oil lamp, they saw a large, pure white figure in the black water. The white alligator appeared once more, this time, almost completely silent, like a ghost floating through the swamp. My grandfather said that when he saw the creature, he felt an overwhelming fear. The alligator wasn't just a carried a strange, haunting beauty, as if it had lived for hundreds of years. Gaston couldn't contain his excitement, but my grandfather felt as if they were facing something that wasn't just a beast to be hunted, but a force beyond human comprehension. If it doesn't want us near, we'll never have a chance, my grandfather said. But Gaston didn't heed his warning. Just as Gaston was about to raise his gun to shoot, the white alligator lunged out of the water with terrifying speed. Its powerful attack left both my grandfather and Gaston no time to react. They were both thrown from the boat, and as they struggled to regain their balance, the alligator reappeared, suddenly charging at them like a raging wave. They couldn't fight against its strength and speed. "Don't shoot, it's too strong," my grandfather shouted, but it was too late. Gaston fired a shot, but the alligator only suffered a small wound. It continued to charge and completely destroyed their boat. Within seconds, they were surrounded by pitch-black water, unable to escape. After that fierce encounter, my grandfather and Gaston could not continue the journey. They had to return, leaving behind everything they had brought. Once again, they realized that the swamp was not a place meant for humans. It was a separate world, where nature still kept mysteries no one could fully comprehend. When they returned to town, my grandfather decided to quit alligator hunting. But the story of the white alligator of those days confronting fear and survival continued to haunt him, and until the end of his life, he never forgot the strange look in the eyes of that white alligator. 1 year after that fateful hunt, my grandfather never returned to the swamp. Life slowly returned to ordinary routines, but he still couldn't forget those past days, the indescribable feeling of facing that giant white alligator. He often told us the story whenever we sat by the fire. It wasn't just a story of chasing a legendary gator, but a reminder of the limits that humans cannot cross. Yet deep inside him, there was still something he couldn't let go of, a feeling that the hunt hadn't truly ended, and that the white alligator was still there, in the deepest part of the swamp, waiting. In the spring of 1932, when the town of Rosedale had returned to calm after hard times, my grandfather met an old friend at the Blind Tiger Tavern. This man was a hunter named Gaston Duprith, the one he had joined on the previous hunt. Gaston, thin but full of resolve, said that after my grandfather and his group had left the swamp, he had continued to search for the white alligator they had missed. Gaston said that on a new hunt, he had found another white alligator, not the same one they had previously seen, but still a large and mysterious creature. Gaston had lost a few friends during that hunt, and he returned with an unanswered question. Did those white alligators really exist, or were they merely legends passed around by reckless hunters? Feeling he couldn't leave the story unresolved, my grandfather decided to return, but this time, he wouldn't go alone. He contacted a few fellow hunters in town, and they agreed to join him on a hunt, unaware that this time, they would face dangers greater than they could ever imagine. A new group of hunters, fully equipped, set off into the deep parts of the swampland area my grandfather had once ventured into. They were no longer unfamiliar with the terrain and had experience facing fierce alligators. However, this time they weren't searching for ordinary gators. They were hunting a monster, the white alligator they had only heard about through rumors. They moved deep into a place no one dared to enter, where the darkness of the swamp seemed to blanket everything. The sense of danger and tension with every step made everyone feel uneasy, but driven by the promise of a big reward. The rumors of the white alligator, they continued deeper. After 3 days of trudging through the swamp, they discovered signs of the white alligator, not just one, but an entire group of gators. These were not ordinary alligators. Some could be as long as 15 meters. The signs they found clearly showed this was the dwelling of these monstrous creatures. Only when they reached a small abandoned area did they come upon a horrifying scene. The hunters found a group of alligators that had been brutally killed. Large bite marks and signs of a violent attack covered their bodies. They realized that while they had been searching for the legendary white alligator, in reality, another species of creature was living in the swamp, a bloodthirsty, giant breed of alligator that no one could control. At that moment, my grandfather realized that perhaps the white alligator wasn't the only target they had to worry about. These enormous wild creatures were the real danger to anyone who dared to step into the swamp. That night, the hunting group faced a life-or-death battle. One of the giant alligators suddenly attacked their camp, and a brutal fight began. Gunshots rang out in the darkness, screams and splashes echoed continuously. My grandfather and the other hunters fought until sunrise, but the damage was beyond measure. They couldn't kill all of the giant alligators, but they did succeed in scaring them off. This battle made them understand that this swamp was not a place humans could conquer, and sometimes there are things we shouldn't seek because they may be more dangerous than we could ever imagine. After this trip, my grandfather and his friends decided never to return to the swamp again. They were exhausted and realized that there are things in nature that humans cannot control. The story of the white alligator and the giant creatures in the swamp would forever remain a part of his memory, and he never spoke of it again to anyone. In the days following that fateful hunt, the town of Rosedale returned to its usual pace, but for my grandfather, the memories of the swamp and the legendary white alligator continued to haunt him. Whenever he sat by the fire, he would speak of the journey to find the alligator he had once let slip away. But the story had changed. It was no longer the tale of young hunters taking risks, but of a man burdened by pain and regret. After that journey, my grandfather never returned to the swamp. Even though he had completed his mission, everything came at a cost. The pain did not only come from physical exhaustion, but also from the fear he could never escape. He knew that even if he returned again, the white alligator would still be. There is a reminder that some creatures are beyond human control. The town of Rosedale continued on with its normal routines, but my grandfather never truly felt at peace. During a reunion with some old hunters, a strange story resurfaced. A hunter named Charlie, whom my grandfather was very close to, told him that a group of hunters from far away had discovered a massive white alligator, larger than any they had ever seen. This story stirred excitement within the hunting community. Some believed that the white alligator still existed, while others dismissed it as legend. But those who had entered the swamp, like my grandfather and Gaston, could feel that there were things no one could explain. If the white alligator truly existed, it was not an ordinary alligator. It was a mysterious creature beyond the limits of nature. In the fall of 1933, while people still hadn't forgotten the tale of the white alligator, another group of hunters decided to return to the swamp. This time, they weren't just searching for alligators, but for a creature they believed could bring them wealth and fame. But they didn't know that, in the darkness of the swamp, a mysterious predator was watching their every step. These hunters were not beginners. They were seasoned hunters who had tracked alligators for many years. They knew the dangers of the swamp well, but none of them knew that a creature more massive and dangerous than any alligator was lurking nearby. As the hunting group approached the area where they believed the white alligator lived, a strange feeling came over them. An uneasy tension filled the air. They began hearing strange noises from afar, sounds they had never heard before. Everything seemed silent, yet terrifying. Suddenly, a giant alligator appeared, leaping from the shadows. But this was not the white alligator they were seeking. It was even larger and more powerful. Its skin had an unusual color, glossy and reflecting light in a ghostly way. The group didn't have time to react, and within seconds, they were thrown into a battle with the monstrous creature. Although they tried using guns and traps, the alligator was too strong, too fast. It wasn't just a creature that could be caught, it was a part of the swamp itself, a living force that couldn't be defeated. After the brutal fight, only 2 hunters survived. They returned to town, carrying wounds and memories of the battle with the monstrous creature. The people of the town couldn't believe what they heard, but my grandfather, with the memories still haunting him, knew very well that there are things humans cannot conquer, and those creatures still lurk in the dark of the swamp, waiting for intruders. In the end, my grandfather decided that the hunt for the white alligator was too dangerous and not worth continuing. He gave up hunting alligators and never returned to the swamp again. The stories of the white alligator and the deadly encounters would always be part of his life's memories. As time went on, though other hunters in town returned to their regular work, my grandfather couldn't escape the haunting memories of that hunt. He often sat alone in the evenings, staring at the dim oil lamps in the house, thinking of the white alligator and the days in the swamp he would never forget. In the fall of 1933, my grandfather heard a strange story from a fellow hunter. This man described a massive white alligator that he and his group had seen on a previous hunt. They had seen it, but like the others, they couldn't catch the legendary beast. What my grandfather couldn't forget was the way the man described the alligator. It had a strange appearance, with skin as white as pearl, glowing red eyes like fire, and incredible strength. This story made my grandfather even more determined to return to the swamp, not just to hunt, but to face the fear that still haunted him. Even though he knew the mission was dangerous and could lead to death, he couldn't give it up. Deep down, he believed the white alligator wasn't just a normal creature, it was nature's challenge, an existence he had to confront. My grandfather decided that if he couldn't find the white alligator this time, he would give up hunting for good and live the rest of his life in peace. He said he was too tired of endless battles with nature and creatures no one could understand. Still, curiosity and the need to prove himself pushed him to face the dangers of the swamp one more time. This time, he didn't go alone. Gaston, the hunter friend he had met on the previous hunter, decided to join him. Gaston was a skilled hunter, but even he had his own fears. He knew the area they were heading to wasn't just home to ordinary alligators. It was where unimaginable monsters lived together. The two of them began their journey deep into the swamp. They moved carefully, knowing each step could lead to death. The narrow, pitch-black rivers and towering cypress trees created a dark curtain that covered everything around them. Everything was silent, but in my grandfather's heart, he knew that silence wasn't a good sign. After several days deep in the swamp, they began to notice strange signs on the ground, giant footprints, deep bite marks on trees, and even bloodstains from a previous battle. A growing sense of unease filled my grandfather. They started to realize that the white alligator they were searching for might not be the only danger in that forest. There was another creature, bigger, stronger, stalking them from the shadows. One night, as the hunters set up camp to rest, they heard strange noises from afar. It sounded like a massive animal moving in the dark. My grandfather and Gaston immediately stood up, ready for anything. But when they looked into the distance, all they could see was darkness and glowing red eyes, the eyes of creatures they couldn't clearly see. The next morning, as they moved deeper into the dense forest, they suddenly saw a large white figure surge from the water. It was the white alligator my grandfather had been searching for all this time. This alligator was unlike any they had seen before, enormous, with snow-white skin and eyes red as fire. It wasn't just strong, it possessed a strange power beyond human understanding. Just as they were about to attack, the white alligator disappeared back into the water before my grandfather and Gaston could react. Though they fired many shots, the alligator was too fast and too strong. In the end, they realized nothing could harm the white alligator. It was a creature that could not be conquered. After the failed confrontation with the white alligator, my grandfather and Gaston returned to town. They hadn't found the legendary creature, but they had discovered something even more important. There are things in nature that humans cannot control. They understood that no matter how strong a person is, they can never triumph over the creatures nature has created. In the end, my grandfather gave up alligator hunting. The stories of the white alligator and those mysterious hunts remained part of his life's memories. But there was one thing he never forgot. In the wild world, there are things we simply cannot understand, and sometimes it's best not to challenge them. After my grandfather and his friends decided to give up alligator hunting, they returned to their normal lives in the town of Rosedale. However, not everyone could forget that haunting journey. The feeling of failure of not being able to capture the white alligator they had searched for over so many months continued to cling to my grandfather. Although he decided never to return to the swamp, deep inside, a part of him still could not forget. Whenever he sat by the fire, he would recall those days when the white shadow of the great alligator still haunted him. Maybe the white alligator really does exist, my grandfather said when telling the story, though he wasn't entirely sure. And that was why he decided that one day, if he had the chance, he would return. Although my grandfather no longer hunted alligators, the story of the white alligator never faded from the hearts of the townspeople. Rumors of the giant creature continued to spread, causing some younger hunters to become overwhelmed by curiosity and decide to set out in search of it. Some people in town, especially the older hunters, warned them about the dangers of venturing deep into the swamp. That place is not meant for humans, an old hunter once said. It's the domain of creatures we can't understand, and if you take the risk, you may never come back. But no one could stop the curiosity, especially the young, those who lacked experience and didn't fully understand the dangers of the swamp. They listened to the rumors, believing that if they just went a little farther, they would find the white alligator. One day, a group of young hunters decided to set out in search of the legendary alligator. Among them was a man named Louis, a young man with a desire to prove himself. He had heard stories of the white alligator since he was a child and had always dreamed of finding it. With passion and determination, Louis convinced a few of his friends to join the search. They had no idea that this journey would lead them into a hopeless battle against nature. With thorough preparation, they boarded their boat and began their journey deep into the swamp. Everything went smoothly during the first few days, as they moved through small, narrow rivers, where there wasn't too much danger. However, The deeper they went into the swamp, the more foggy and oppressive the atmosphere became. After a few days, the group began to notice strange signs, giant footprints in the mud, bright red bloodstains, and a strange atmosphere that enveloped everything. These signs made them start to suspect that they were nearing the habitat of the white alligator they were searching for. One night, as the group set up camp and prepared to rest, they heard the gentle sound of water lapping. At first they thought nothing of it, but the sound grew closer. One member of the group, named Jacob, suddenly stood up and said, "I feel like something's wrong. It's probably just a gator," Louis replied, but he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes. At that moment, everyone in the group could sense the danger lurking around them. The strange noises from behind made them tense, even though they had mentally prepared themselves. As the darkness thickened, they began to fear what might be hiding in the swamp. That at dawn, the group continued on their way, but not long after, they spotted a large alligator swimming nearby. It wasn't the white alligator they were hoping for, but this one looked especially dangerous. It was huge and powerful, with glossy black skin like ink. The group wasn't prepared for this fight. In just a few seconds, the alligator charged into the group, destroying their boat and forcing everyone to fight for their lives. Their guns and bullets weren't enough to stop it, and they had to use all their strength to drive the alligator back. In the end, after a fierce battle, they managed to bring down the gator, but none of them felt victorious. Their injuries and exhaustion made them realize they could no longer continue the hunt for the white alligator. When they returned to town, the young hunters couldn't fully grasp the pain that my grandfather and the veteran hunters had experienced. They had placed so much hope in this trip, but the price they paid was too high. Many in the group were injured, and the deaths in the swamp continued to serve as a warning to those who dared to take the risk. My grandfather said that although he and his friends had returned safely, they could never escape the memories of the white alligator and the giant creatures of the swamp. It was a battle they would never forget, and it would always be a part of the stories he passed down to future generations. When the group of hunters returned to town, their tired and anxious faces became part of their lasting memories. None of them could forget the days spent in the swamp. Even though they had completed part of their mission, the feeling of helplessness still lingered. My grandfather said that after that trip, he never looked at the swamp the same way again. He had come to truly understand that there are things in nature that humans cannot comprehend and should not try to conquer. The hunts that followed no longer brought him any joy. He returned to a peaceful life, but deep inside, he could never forget the horrifying memories from his encounter with the white alligator and the other creatures of the swamp. Every night, while sitting by the fire, he would often tell the younger members of the family about the hunting trip, the hardships he faced, and the dangers from which he narrowly escaped. However, the story of the white alligator never truly ended. Even though he had given up hunting, the rumors of that mysterious creature continued to spread throughout the town. People still couldn't believe that a giant alligator lived in the swamp, and some still chose to keep searching. In 1935, as the town of Rosedale began to recover from the difficult years, a group of young hunters returned to the swamp to continue the search for the white alligator that they believed was just a legend. The warnings of older hunters, including my grandfather, did not stop them. This swamp is no place for the curious. My grandfather reminded them, there are creatures here that we cannot understand, and if you're not careful, you may never come back. But regardless, the young hunters set out, believing they would find the white alligator and become well known in the town. They brought weapons, supplies, and all the necessary equipment for their journey deep into the swamp. As the young hunters ventured deeper into the swamp, they began to feel the looming danger around them. Strange sounds, thick darkness, and signs of wild creatures constantly watching made them uneasy. They crossed narrow rivers, passed through dense forests, and at times, they could hear strange noises from afar as if a giant creature was following them. One night, while they were setting up camp and resting, one of them suddenly disappeared. This friend left no trace, and the group didn't realize it until they began to search. Panic set in, and worry grew as they found no clues. One of them began to hear strange sounds from behind, as if something was silently stalking them. At dawn, the hunting group continued searching for their missing friend, but what they found was not life. Instead, they discovered a horrifying scene. One of their boats had been torn apart, and the missing friend's body was lying on the shore, brutally attacked. The wounds showed that he had been attacked by an alligator and dragged into the water. Group couldn't believe their eyes. They realized that this time, they weren't just facing a white alligator. They were facing the death and destruction brought by the very creatures they had always considered their prey. By the time they returned, the sun had already set. Those who survived could not forget the sight. Their courage had failed to overcome the brutality of nature. The young hunters gave up their hunt for the white alligator and vowed never to return to the swamp. They had lost a friend and realized that some things cannot be conquered. My grandfather knew that if he had not given up that hunt in 1933, he too might have faced what the young hunters had just endured, and perhaps he too would never have returned. My grandfather had ended his years as an alligator hunter. He returned to a more peaceful life, while the stories of the white alligator continued to be passed down by word of mouth in the town. Whenever he sat by the fire, he would still tell the story, but now with a calmer tone, no longer driven by the desire to conquer or seek danger as before. The story of the white alligator had not ended, but for my grandfather, it had become a great lesson in humility before nature. The giant creatures of the swamp, no matter how mysterious or powerful they were, would always be part of nature, something humans could not control. After the young group of hunters left the swamp and returned, they brought back not only physical injuries, but also emotional scars. The swamp was not just a wild land, but a place full of secrets not everyone was meant to face. The young hunters, full of curiosity and determination, had risked their lives for a legend they could never conquer. My grandfather, although he had chosen to give up alligator hunting, could never forget the terrifying images he had witnessed in the swamp. The giant white alligators, the life and death battles with creatures beyond human understanding, and the deaths he and his companions had seen all became indelible memories. As time passed, my grandfather gradually found peace in his new life. He left behind his haunted past and turned to a different job. But even as he busied himself with family life, he could never forget those journeys deep into the swamp. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would tell us about the white alligator and the strange creatures he had encountered. It was not just a tale of pursuit, but a lesson in humility and a reminder that there are things in nature that humans cannot control. One evening, as my grandfather was retelling this story, I noticed something unusual. Even after so many years, he still couldn't shake the fear. It seemed that every time he mentioned the swamp, his eyes would drift off, as if reliving those terrifying moments. I asked him, "Grandpa, do you ever want to go back to the swamp?" And he answered simply, "No, child, those things don't belong to us." My grandfather had found new joy in his work and family, but a part of him always carried the memory of the swamp. Even so, he could never let go of the curiosity and the unanswered questions about the white alligator. He often said that, even though he had given up, part of him still believed the white alligator was out there, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. Then one day, in the summer of 1941, my grandfather decided to leave town and live elsewhere. He wanted to start a new life, free from the haunting memories of the swamp. Before he left, he visited an old friend, a hunter, who had once accompanied him on dangerous hunts. They sat and talked for a while, and that friend reminded him of the strange tales they had once shared, stories of the white alligator that no one could ever explain. After my grandfather moved to another town and began a peaceful life, he happened to meet a group of young hunters who were still pursuing the white alligator. They said they had found its tracks in a faraway area no one dared to go. They described a giant creature with pure white skin and eyes red like fire. Even though my grandfather had long given up, hearing those words stirred something inside him. He decided to return, knowing full well that what awaited him could be unspeakably dangerous. One early morning, my grandfather set off once more, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought along a few friends and a new group of hunters, people who had heard the story and wanted to search for the white alligator. My grandfather felt that, No matter what, his curiosity about the creature would never let him forget. But this journey turned out to be one that would never be completed. He and the hunting party did not find the white alligator. Instead, they uncovered a truth none of them could have imagined. They discovered that the white alligator truly existed, but not in the way they had believed. It was a creature that could not be hunted, a being beyond human understanding. In the end, my grandfather returned to his peaceful life. But the story of the white alligator lived on in his mind. What he had experienced wasn't just a hunting tale, it was a reminder of the things humans cannot control, of the need for humility and respect for nature. He always told me, sometimes you have to understand that some things aren't meant for us, and those creatures, no matter how powerful or strange, have the right to exist in their own way. Years after my grandfather left the swamp, the story of the white alligator still haunted him. Even though he lived a quiet life in a new countryside, the memories of the hunts and the fierce confrontations with strange creatures continued to haunt him. He never said it out loud, but his eyes, when speaking of those days, always revealed the complexity within his soul. Those were memories filled with both belief and fear. By then, my grandfather had grown old, but he still held on to his stories of the swamp, the giant alligators, and the dangerous hunts. He still spoke of the white alligator, but no longer with a desire to chase it, only with respect and a hint of doubt. Although my grandfather had given up alligator hunting, he could never forget the stories he had lived through in the swamp. One summer evening, as he sat by the fire, he heard rumors of a giant white alligator, creature everyone believed to be a legend. However, this time, the story was unlike anything he had heard before. His old friend Gaston, who had hunted with him on a previous trip, told him that after they left the swamp, Gaston and his group of hunters had returned and discovered traces of a white alligator, even larger than the one they had encountered before. It was strange, Gaston said. Its skin was as white as snow, and its eyes glowed red. But the alligator wasn't just powerful, it was intelligent, as if it knew we were coming. Gaston's words felt like a calling, and my grandfather couldn't stop thinking about returning to the swamp. He knew this hunt could be more dangerous than ever before, but something deep inside him pushed him to go one last time. "We can't give up," my grandfather told Gaston, his voice full of determination. "If we don't go back, we may never know if the white alligator is real or not." Though my grandfather had grown older, part of him still wanted to prove that the mysterious creatures they had heard about were not just myths. This time, he wouldn't go alone. Gaston, a seasoned hunter, agreed to join him. They planned a more serious expedition, with full equipment, weapons, and supplies for a long journey. But before they departed, some friends in town, men who had once hunted with my grandfather, warned them about the danger awaiting. "That swamp isn't a place for humans," they said. "There are creatures that cannot be conquered. Once is enough." Even so, the young hunters couldn't resist their curiosity. The story of the white alligator haunted them, and they wanted to prove it was all just a myth. Despite the elders' warnings, they set out. My grandfather and Gaston led the new hunting party, which included a young man named Louis, a hunter with a burning desire to prove himself. Louis had heard about the white alligator since childhood and had always dreamed of seeing it with his own eyes. The group, filled with passion and determination, began their journey deep into the swamp. At first, everything went smoothly. They crossed narrow rivers and passed through dense forests without encountering serious danger. As they ventured deeper into the swamp, they began to notice strange signs: giant footprints in the mud, bright red bloodstains, and an eerie atmosphere surrounding them. The further they went, the more they felt the presence of something watching them. The large cypress trees cast twisted shadows on the water under the lantern's glow, creating ghostly shapes. But they didn't stop. They kept going, even as the worry and tension continued to build. One night, while they were camping and resting, one of them, named Jacob, suddenly disappeared. When the group realized he was missing, fear set in. There was no trace of Jacob, only an overturned boat and bloodstains nearby. At dawn, the hunters decided to search for their missing friend. They combed through the surrounding area, but found no sign of Jacob. Suddenly, as they approached a narrow river, they witnessed a horrifying scene. a giant alligator with glossy skin and glowing red eyes shot out of the water. It was a terrifying sight. The hunters froze, unable to react. The alligator was too large, too powerful, and it seemed to anticipate their every move. They fought for their lives. But one of them was dragged under the water and disappeared as the battle between man and beast reached its peak. The remaining hunters realized they couldn't overcome the creature. Exhaustion, pain from their wounds, and the harshness of the swamp made them see the truth. In this swamp, there was only one true victor: nature itself. The white alligator was either a mysterious being or a part of nature's laws that they could never understand. In the end, the group of hunters decided to return to town. They hadn't found the white alligator, and the dangerous expedition had left scars that would never heal. The survivors came back with injuries, stories, and a powerful lesson. Never take risks lightly when facing nature. After everything he had been through, my grandfather returned and chose to give up alligator hunting for good. The stories of the white alligator came to an end, but their haunting presence lived on in his mind. And when he retold the story to the younger members of the family, it wasn't just about experience, it was a warning that there are things in nature that humans cannot control and should not try to conquer. The story of my grandfather's white alligator hunt and that of the others ended with exhaustion, regret, and valuable lessons. Whether it was legend or a real creature, the white alligator remained an unanswered question. It became a symbol of the hidden dangers in the swamp and a reminder that humans can never fully control nature. Well, today's story has come to an end, but did those mysterious events really finish? Be careful, for the darkness might still linger somewhere out there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more terrifying ghost stories. Sleep well, if you dare.